What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to give my spoiler-free review of Resident Evil Infinite Darkness, coming to Netflix on July 8th. The 4-episode series was created by Hiroyuki Kobayashi, who's been working in various roles on the games, movies, and shows related to this franchise all the way back to 1996 with the very first game. And the series was directed by Eiichiro Hasumi, if I'm saying that correctly. But in terms of overall continuity, this show takes place right after the game, Resident Evil 4, which works great for me because that is the game I am most familiar with. I've played most of the games and I've seen all the movies, but when I first got Resident Evil 4 on the PlayStation 2, I basically lost about 2 months of my life as I played it over and over and over, and to this day, it is one of my all-time favorite games. One that I think is a perfect blend of horror, first-person shooter, and RPG. I even made some videos about it years ago when I thought I might get into recording video game playthroughs. In any event, as a result of the hundreds of hours that I spent playing that game, I'm emotionally invested in the character of Leon, who is the star of this new show. I had so many vivid flashbacks while watching the show, and I kept hearing Ashley's voice in the back of my mind screaming, "Leon!" But for those of you who don't know who Leon is, he first appeared in Resident Evil 2 and is also one of the playable characters in Resident Evil 6. The recurring character Claire Redfield is also a massive part of the show, as well as two characters I'd never seen before, Shen-Mei and Jason, and I think both of these characters' fans are absolutely going to love them. Now, when I got my press screener, Netflix was very specific about which plot points have to be avoided at all costs. So I'm going to err on the side of caution and keep my comments very general, because when someone's nice enough to send me a press screener, I want to make sure not to burn that bridge and that they continue to send me press screeners in the future, especially since Netflix creates so much amazing animation. But in broad strokes, the story takes place in 2006 when Leon is called in for a job at the White House. All hell breaks loose. Huge surprise. I mean, this is Resident Evil. You always know that infections and zombies and bioweapons and corrupt corporations and evil politicians, etc., they're always going to be part of the package. But Leon and Claire both end up investigating this new crisis, which ties back directly to the scene featured in the opening clip that Netflix released about 2 weeks ago, where a military mission into the country of Panamstan in the year 2000, it all went horribly wrong. And what makes this series interesting structurally is how it's constantly cutting back and forth to this event in 2000 from different characters' points of view. And for me, those flashback scenes were by far the most unsettling and disturbing. I've seen a lot of really strange, provocative, shocking content in my day, but even with all that emotional scar tissue that I've accumulated over the years, there was one scene in particular that was seriously giving me the heebie-jeebies. Imagine something that feels like a cross between Ridley Scott's movie Black Hawk Down and take your pick from the scariest zombie film that you've ever seen. That's what the scene was like. But the show also features some really slick action scenes with great choreography. I prefer the horror ingredients, but to each their own. Now, going into this, I worried that the whole show would just feel like cutscenes and cinematics from a game that I would not get a chance to play. Because historically, adapting game franchises into shows and movies, it's always tricky because on the whole, gamers like to have a controller in their hands. They want to shoot shit. Whereas watching film and television is more or less a passive experience. And I won't say that my fears were completely baseless. However, the show does manage to stand on its own 2 feet, especially in episodes 2 and 3, which serve up some horrific scenes that will satisfy any fans of the franchise. But if you feel a sudden and irresistible and overwhelming itch to play a Resident Evil game while watching this show, you are not alone. It was probably intentional, now that I think of it, to make us buy more games. But it's crazy to me to think that this franchise has now been going strong for 25 years, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if we're still talking about it in 25 more years. All you need is the occasional home run project, and the franchise's life expectancy gets extended a few more years. And the show, it's not a complete and total home run, but I was entertained, and I'll definitely be back for more animation if they give us more seasons of this show. I think what I liked most was just the overall look of the show. They didn't reinvent the style and flavor to this world. They just leaned all the way into its classic signature atmosphere. Leon's hair and leather jacket, they look great as always, no matter what hellacious foe he might be annihilating. But there's this interesting new wrinkle to this world where the technology used to create the animation, it's become so sophisticated and so detailed that the animation at times is almost photorealistic in its intensity. And yet the show is still stylized. It's not going for realism at all. So as a result, there's this really interesting tension between the visual look and the photorealism of the detail, and consequently, the horror scenes are way more intense than I've experienced with past games in this franchise, especially during these scenes that are lit only by flashlights and the muzzle flare of firearms. And as far as criticisms go, I only have a few. First, the voice acting was a little weak with a few of the characters. I watched it in English, but perhaps I should have watched it in Japanese, given the fact that Netflix has a really poor track record of dubbing foreign shows and movies. Also, with only 4 relatively short episodes, I kept thinking to myself, why wasn't this simply a feature film. It would have ended up being about 1 hour and 45 minutes or 2 hours total, but I guess that's simply further evidence of the decline of movies in terms of overall cultural relevance. People just prefer watching shows, and that trend is unlikely to be reversed anytime soon. My one major critique is that the final episode places much more emphasis on action over horror, but who knows? There could be just as many people out there who prefer that switch depending upon their tastes and preferences. In any event, the show has so many gruesome surprises and kick-ass scenes that at a bare minimum, any fan of these games and movies should definitely take a look. But I have to say that of all the games and shows and movies that I've now been exposed to in the world of Resident Evil 4 still reigns supreme as my all-time favorite by a very healthy margin. But that's all I can say without breaking any rules, so thanks again to Netflix for letting me have a sneak peek in advance. I look forward to hearing what folks have to say about the show, and definitely let me know in the comments below what your favorite entries have been over the last 25 years during this crazy ride that fans have now been enjoying for a quarter century. But please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you want to talk more, hunt me down on Twitter at Geeking Out. But I can't thank you enough for watching, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.